that when we're looking at like, well, how far is it to that stop sign, to that finish line, to that end state where I'm like, I want to walk a half a mile. What does a half a mile look like? Well, it's got to take me to that building, or it's going to take me 3 times around the track, or whatever. How we look at that space really matters. As a behavioral scientist, what does it mean to like see the finish line is further away? When something looks hard, when it looks farther away, it feels like, I'm not sure that I can make it. Self-efficacy goes down. The task looks more difficult.
Hey, everybody. We've had some of the most incredible guests coming to you these past couple of months. The amount of expertise and knowledge on these cutting edge topics is something we really hope that you enjoy. And if you do, it would make a huge difference to us if you could rate, review, and subscribe the podcast. It helps us to get more guests, better experts, and talk about all of the things that are really important to you. So give us a love, give us a lot of love, and don't forget to subscribe so you get all our new episodes. Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast. I'm Rachel, and I have a really special guest for you today. Our specialist is going to let you know everything you have ever wondered about why you seem to see things one way and the person standing next to you sees them totally different. I have for you today Emily Balcetis, and I am so excited to hear all the important research that you've been doing, Emily. It's really incredible in the field.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited for this chat.
Emily is an award-winning behavioral scientist. She's an associate professor of psychology at New York University. And she also is the author of the book, Clearer, Closer, Better: How Successful People See the World. This is such important work. You've done TED Talks that have amassed millions of views now. And all of the research is you're pioneering the investigation of motivation and uncovering previously unknown strategies that sustain people's efforts to meet their goals. Like, is this what everyone has been looking for?
For decades, for lifetimes, right? Since probably humans have been created, people have been looking for how can I better meet my goals.
Yes. And thinking of it, or well, we'll get into the perception, but thinking of it in terms of what we are seeing and how accurate it is to maybe I don't know. Is there a truth? Let's see. You have dedicated your career to the fact that we all may be seeing the same thing, but we are all perceiving it a little bit differently. And the first time that I was introduced to this, I remember it took the internet by storm. I'm old, but it was the gold dress or the blue dress.
Yeah, I know exactly. I mean, yeah, that was probably the most viral shopping, like gone viral shopping experience between a mom and a daughter that the world has ever seen. It was crazy, right? Because she was just going shopping. She took a picture of herself in the dressing room in England, like trying on a dress, and then texted it and said like to her family and just said like, "What do you think? Is this going to work for the event? What do you think about?" I can't remember which way she saw it, like this white and gold dress. And they're like, "What are you talking about? It's blue and black." And they're like, "No, it's white and gold. It's blue and black. It's white and gold." And they're like, "Let's just ask the internet." And then the internet went crazy, and it like, produced, oh God, like it got hashtagged the dress millions and millions of times. And led people to have like some of the biggest fights. The polarization along the dress was like extreme. It was crazy.
It was so crazy, but I definitely remember being surprised at like how people were so dug into their side, and I was one of them. Like, it was gold. I couldn't see anything else. There was no other way that I could see it. But it was so interesting and shocking to me that people were saying the same thing about it being blue, that they couldn't see it another way. And so why were we all so sure that we were the ones seeing it right?
I mean, I think this is a great example of like why somebody who's a behavioral scientist who has dedicated their life to studying people would be fascinated with vision science. Because we saw what happened within families, within friend groups, all over the internet, on Reddit discussion boards. Like the world went crazy because they were so certain that what they saw was right. They couldn't see somebody else's perspective. And the same for the other side, was so certain that what they saw was right. They couldn't possibly understand how could somebody be legitimately seeing it another way. We have all kinds of cliches like seeing is believing that entrenches this idea that our eyes are infallible, that they get the world right. What we see is what is really out there. But it's really cool when you like break down the neuroscience of what happens for us to be able to see. You can start to understand why that hashtag the dress might have happened. So, like, seeing really happens because there's something out there that gets inside of here. There are light waves that we can't see with our own eyes. Well, we can't see that we're seeing them with our own eyes. It bounces off what's out there. It's got to go through that tiny little black dot in the middle of our eye, which is actually a hole in our iris, the colored part that surrounds it. That light has to enter that hole and then it hits the retina, like this layer of cells on the back of our eyeball. And then those cells fire, fire, fire. They go crazy. They send a signal to your optic nerve, which then directly connects to your brain. And then we start the experience of seeing. So there is a big gap between what is out there and what hits our brain for us to be able to experience what is out there. And so there's lots of room then for that to go awry. What light, what kind of light, which elements of that light hit our eyeball is one of those. For instance, if I'm looking there and you're looking there, we're seeing the world in an entirely different way. We're even though we're sitting in the same room, we might be only seeing half of the real story. But then the brain has to get involved because we got to translate those light rays, those little explosions from the cells on the back of the retina, into something that makes sense, that we can understand and label and put into context. And so there's interpretation that happens before we see anything, before we experience seeing anything. And all of that interpretation, which is essential for seeing, happens through psychological processes, our past experiences, what we've seen before, what we haven't seen before is going to influence that interpretation. And so just knowing those few bits about how seeing works might give some insight into how like hashtag the dress could have happened, or even bigger, more controversial, more socially important discrepancies in how we understand the world can come to be.
Well, I think, the current state of, the world right now, especially in the United States, I think that your work has never been more important when it comes to polarization. But I just want to get this straight. We cannot see anything without interpreting it first. Is
Yes.
that correct?
Yes, yes. Interpretation is part of the process of seeing. We got to translate those light waves that are floating all around us into something that makes sense.
And there's no shutting that off.
No, no. You wouldn't see if you shut that off.
So, okay, so we're seeing, I've heard you explain it in a way that we're kind of seeing a small piece of
Mhm,
something and our brain is sort of filling in the
mhm,
rest.
mhm.
Um, how does that work, first of all? And how does the brain decide what to fill in?
Well, you know, the brain has been in the 60s, the brain was described as a computer. Like when computers were starting to become a thing, 60 years ago in the 1960s, people are like, what is a computer? What does this thing do? And they're like, oh, it's a brain. So brain and computer metaphors were used sort of interchangeably to understand computers, to understand what the brain is. So that's really old school to use that as a metaphor. But that's where it started. And when you think about it like that, the goal of a brain then is to help you navigate the world, to do that safely, successfully, make you happy, and keep going through this life. In order to do that, it's got to decide, well, what's important and what's not. Because the world is filled with so much more information than we can consciously, effortfully make sense of and respond to in a way that fits those goals and those needs about what it is to be a human. So if we were to be fully aware and processing everything that's around us, I'm in New York City, I'm looking out my window right now. There's probably no less than 3,000 buildings I can see from my one very small window. If I was really making sense of all those buildings and all those windows and what's happening behind each of those windows, in addition to what's going on in the room that's around me and my children that are out there, and it would be completely overwhelming, literally. So it would overwhelm our brain and we wouldn't be able to decide what's important right now, focusing on this conversation. So our brain has to decide what is going to get our focused attention and what is not. And that what is not part, how does the brain turn that off? Well, in some sense, it's literally like going blind. We don't experience seeing some things that are in our world when part of what we're doing, the goals that we have, what we're thinking about right now, has led us to filter it out. For the brain to decide, well, that's not important right now. What's happening outside in New York City is not important right now. So I can tune it out. We know what that feels like, of being tuned out or like being mindless about something that we're engaged in. We can imagine reading a book, going line by line as paragraph has gone by, and you're like, oh, wait a minute, sorry, I just like my mind wandered. Well, mind wandering happens when we're reading a book, but it can also it happens all the time where our brain has decided I'm just not going to give that any attention right now. And that is critical for us to be able to do our job well, to have a meaningful conversation, to focus on what is most important right now without giving everything equal weight and attention, which would completely overwhelm us and sink us. We'd be underwater.
Oh, that's so interesting. When I think about how unique each person's brain function is in their past and their histories and their trauma and even just like neurodivergency and just the different ways in which people's brain functions on a neurological level, it it's really interesting to think that we are all processing the same thing through a totally different lens and then spitting out. So does this mean then that everything that we're seeing is somehow influenced by past experiences, history, even things like trauma?
Absolutely. Let me give maybe just another example, and then we can come back to that really important question that you're talking about. But just an example that everybody can relate to. All of the different neurological differences that you talked about are beautiful and critical for understanding how we as humans work. But something that we all have in common is, as humans, for those of us that have two eyes and are sighted, which does leave out some of the population, is that our eyes are located on different parts of our face. What that means is that like this part of my eye is picking up part of the world over here that this eye can't see. Like this eye can't see everything that's going on over here because of peripheral vision, right? Like this part of my peripheral vision is going to get more of the world over here, but this part of my eye is going to get more of through peripheral vision of what's going on over here. That means even for two people, even for a person with two eyes, our eyes are getting different information, right? We're getting two pictures of the world through each of our individual eyes. And yet we never experience that. We never realize we are actually seeing two versions of the world with our own face, with our own eyes, unless you have maybe as a kid swung really high on a swing set, jumped off that swing, landed poorly, and bonked the back of your head. Or you've had a sports injury, maybe in a contact sport, you've knocked heads, and then like for a second you have double vision. Maybe you've had that experience or you've heard about that experience. What double vision is that process of stitching together the two different visual experiences each eye is having is like temporarily disjointed. It's kind of messed up. So any one person is actually getting two pictures of the world, and yet our brain knows like, well, that is weird. Like that's not going to be helpful, and that actually can make you seasick. It could produce nausea. So I don't want that to happen. So the brain stitches those two images together to create one experience, clear vision, almost all of the time for people who have two eyes. But yet, like really the science of it is that we are constantly seeing two different, slightly different depictions of the world out there, and we don't know it.
That is so wild to think about and obvious, right? Because we know that our eyes are like interacting on
Mhm.
different sides, and we know that they can function individually, like I can close one eye and still
Right,
see.
right.
But the fact that there's actually two versions of the world, that's so let's talk about then how we're stitching those together and what our brain is bringing to that process from everything that goes into making us us. So, our history, our past, like what is happening with regards to our brain and how it's seeing things in the now.
Sure. So, you talked about these important neurodivergences, neurodiversities, past trauma. One that is highly relatable for a lot of people is anxiety and what anxiety feels like: a tight chest, feeling like you're going to throw up, feeling distracted, ruminations. What that does is put us in a really specific mental state. Now, think about the contrast where you're not feeling that way, where your anxiety has passed. You've thrown yourself into something else where those cognitions change. Our visual experiences change along with it. So come back to that idea that our brain sort of filters, lets some stuff in, and makes us, in a sense, blind to other aspects of what's around us. Anxieties do that. That's part of the psychological baggage, and I mean that in all of the senses that can mean. It's the filter that we see the world through, and it's that trauma that we carry with us. It can lead us to pay more attention to some information and to downgrade other information. You can imagine public speaking. For some people, for a lot of people, that's their number one fear. In fact, there was a survey done a while ago, but I'm pretty sure the results still stand, asking people, what's the biggest fear that you have in life? Death makes sense, but actually, even more than death, it's public speaking. More people fear public speaking than dying, even so it's big, right? And why are people afraid of public speaking? Causes anxiety. And then that anxiety can be cyclical, because when you're standing up on that stage, there's people out in front of you. What is it that a lot of people who experience fear and anxiety gravitate towards? It can be those faces of people that might not be smiling, those that are deep in thought, those whose mind has wandered and are elsewhere, or maybe the very few and grumpy people who are actually having a scowl on their face because they're not into what you're saying. We gravitate to those people when we are in states of anxiety, and science supports that oftentimes when we're feeling that fear, that anxiety, that arousal, it leads us to look for elements of the world that align with that, to confirm our beliefs about the world, or to filter out what might be an alternative reality, an alternative understanding. And so, in that sense, it's cyclical. That trauma, that anxiety that we are experiencing, can be corroborated through that filtering process where our eyes gravitate to those people who are experiencing, or at least who look like they're experiencing something similar. So we have to work hard to combat that. We need to work hard, and we can control where our eyes look. We also have facets in place that lead us to look inadvertently, unintentionally, but we can control where we look. If I want to look this way, I can. If I want to look that way, I can. And if we know that where we direct our visual frame can impact what we take in, we can use that strategically as a tool to overcome what might be that natural propensity to let anxiety gravitate us towards that negativity that's in the world around us. We can work hard to break that cycle.
This is this is where how successful people see the world comes in, because we are under the impression that this is all happening to us without any of our control. We just see what we see.
Mhm.
But the idea then is, and you tell me if this sounds correct, are we actually just seeing what we want to see?
If we let ourselves. And
Okay.
right? So I think a lot of people with anxiety don't want to experience that anxiety. I know that, I've had moments in my life, phases in my life where the anxiety does feel overwhelming. That's not a place where I want to live. And I, took steps to move myself out of that place. And I think a lot of people can gravitate towards that. But there's also just how our brain works. And our brain is set up to confirm our understanding of the world, to make sure we see the world the way that it's supposed to be seen. But that anxiety is changing what it is that we pay attention to. And that's where that cycle comes from. But if we know this about what might be a natural propensity or what might be a source of that feedback cycle that's contributing to the anxiety, we can actively try to take back control. We can empower our own sense of sight and our abilities to control that sense of sight to try to change our visual experience, which can, of course, have trickle down effects for our experience of anxiety, for example.
Wow. It feels really hopeful to
Mhm.
think about being in the driver's seat in that way and sort of, being in charge of
Mhm.
your perception and what you're seeing. That feels really empowering. I want to take this to some real life scenarios that people face on a daily basis. Quick interruption, guys. We are always talking about the importance of community to help you along your journey, to keep you motivated, to surround you with like minded people. And we have a massive, massive community to do just that. If you haven't already, get in our fitness group on Facebook, Fitness Programming by CVG. Get on our app, CVG Nation. We've got hundreds of thousands of women on there who are just waiting to cheer you on. And we cannot wait to meet you. Get with us on our channels. We love to see you there. You gave a great talk about specifically exercise and why some people see exercise as quote unquote easier than other people. We can also talk about this in the way of nutrition. Is the way that we're seeing food and exercise and some of these things that people consider necessary but difficult to do consistently. Is this something that we can change the way that we're actually viewing it?
Yes, absolutely. So, vision is not going to be a cure all for all of the world's woes, but it is one more tool that we have in our tool belt of motivation and goal setting to help us along the way. And, toolkits need to have various tools in them. You can't build a house if all you have is a hammer. So think about vision in that way, and not just vision, not just how we see, but there's different aspects of how we try to take back control of a visual experience that might be even like subsets, like different kinds of screwdrivers within that toolbox to help support our efforts. So, I like to take this back to a survey that was done a long while ago by the American Psychological Association. And they asked people, why do you struggle to meet your goals? The answers are not because I don't care. They're not, I'm not motivated. They're not, I'm not trying hard enough. Now, that's a lot of times what people might tell us, or what might be our own negative self-talk is like, if I just cared more, I must not want this enough. But that is not it. That is not the problem. It's that the tools that we are using might be the wrong tool for the job. So I like to think about vision as offering us yet another tool that can complement what we are using, or maybe even replace something that's not working effectively, or at least to bring awareness to what are we doing and how might be vision impacting or even hurting our chances of success. So yes, fitness. I've spent over 20 years studying how does this all play out, all of this like nerdy brain science stuff play out in terms of getting people to walk and run at all easier, more often, or to have a better experience in it. And there is so much vision science that is tied up in this. It's, to me, really exciting for the same reasons that you have mentioned, that it feels like we have more control. And we do. So, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start, but I'll just start talking and then you can interrupt and say like dig deeper, go elsewhere. But one of the things that we found early on is that people's experience of the space around them is in part determined by the state of their own body. My lab has found this, multiple labs have found this effect to be true. That when we're looking at like, well, how far is it to that stop sign, to that finish line, to that end state where I'm like, I want to walk a half a mile. What does a half a mile look like? Well, it's got to take me to that building, or it's going to take me 3 times around the track, or whatever, 2 times around the track. Um, how we look at that space really matters, and how we look at that space can be dictated by the states of our own body. So we measured waist to hip ratio. That's an indicator like BMI, but uses different metrics to get a sense of the composition of people's bodies. So it's the circumference of your waist over the circumference of your hips, and that metric can capture belly fat, which is an indicator for other health complications. So waist to hip ratio is an indicator of fitness for individuals. And waist to hip ratio predicted how people perceive space. We used lots of different measures to assess, like, how far does that finish line look to you? How far does it seem like it is? That physical perception of space is determined by waist to hip ratio. People with larger waist to hip ratios, for whom the relative size of their bellies to their hips is larger, an indicator of poor fitness, poorer, not poor, just poorer fitness than a smaller waist to hip ratio, they saw that distance as longer. Now, what does that mean? As a behavioral scientist, what does it mean to like see the finish line is further away? There's all kinds of downstream psychological motivational effects of that. When something looks hard, when it looks farther away, it feels like, I'm not sure that I can make it. Self-efficacy goes down. The task looks more difficult. We have a hard time taking on things that look difficult to impossible. I don't think I have the resources to be able to make it there. And that's that self-talk that then translates into behavioral action differences. So that's the process that our bodies can affect our experience of seeing. That experience of seeing changes our motivation in the self-talk, and that can affect our willingness to try to get to that finish line, or the speed with which we try to get to that finish line. Those metrics of performance that are related to improving and sustaining overall fitness. So that's sort of the high level picture of how does our bodies relate to our eyes, relate to our pursuit of fitness goals. Um, and then
So
opens up
I'm
some
sorry
more
to
questions. I'll pause
just
there.
yeah, I just want to be clear. The finish line was the exact same distance
Yes.
for all participants.
Yes.
But the less fit you were, the further you perceived it. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Exactly, exactly. And that's sort of like
Wow.
the hashtag the dress,
Wow.
right? But in the real world where it really matters, where the consequences are big, because I mean, some people aren't walking, they're not running because to them, it looks too hard.
Wow.
And the same with like the steepness of a hill. People's experience of the steepness of the hill is dictated by the weight that they're carrying around in the world. People who are weighted down, and this was done not in my lab but other labs, so experimentally, given heavier backpacks to sort of simulate that experience of carrying added weight. Hills looked steeper to those people than those that didn't have the added weight. And so that can help us bring compassion to ourselves and to other
Yes.
people who are just
Yes.
like, what do you mean you can't like walk that hill, right? Like bring your heart rate up. Like, and they're saying, look, it's too hard. What? It's not too hard. You're not trying hard enough. You don't care hard enough. No, to them, that experience does look different than it does to somebody else.
That is such an important piece of both the empathy that we use with others when it comes to goal setting and their health and fitness, and what we use for ourselves. Um, can we hack this?
Absolutely. You know, it's not to say like this is going to cure everything, but it is a tool that makes it feel not impossible. We want to get away from that self-talk of saying this is impossible and empower us to find those tools that brings back a greater feeling of control. Because again, changing that psychology, changing that self-talk does translate into real behavioral outcome differences. So what's one thing that we've studied? Well, you know, I didn't just create this. I've struggled with my own health and fitness goals through my whole life. I am a human just like everybody else. Just like doctors are not immune to the common cold. Like, you know, I have struggled with this for 30 years as well. So it's not like me and my own smart brain that has figured out the solution to this. I started by going to work with Olympic athletes, some of the fastest, in this case it was men, fastest runners in the world, and ask them about like, well, how are you seeing the world? And are you seeing the world differently than I have, than I have been? And my thoughts about how do their eyes work, what are they looking at, what are they focusing on, was completely backwards, which wasn't really a surprise to me that I might get it wrong, but it provided a lot of insight. So what these fastest runners in the world indicated was that it's almost as if when they're running, they have blinders on. They're not paying attention to what's in their peripheral vision. They've identified a target and they're fixated on it. Now, I should caveat because I have so much more to say about this. These were short distance runners, these were like sprinters. So when they're sprinting, they're focused on a target. They're blind to what's around them. They're not even really paying attention to the competition and where they are relative to them. They have a goal and they're focused on that goal. You can imagine like how do horses like navigate urban cities. If you've ever seen police on mounted horses, they have those blinders on. And in a sense, that's what these runners are doing too. And I thought like, well, I get that. I understand what that is. And I can use words to describe it to other people. What is that experience like? And so we came up with just, a few different metaphors to describe that experience to thousands of other people. And we said, like, imagine a spotlight is shining just on a target that's up ahead. You've set a goal, you found your own finish line, whether it's real or just one that you've set for yourself in this moment. Imagine a spotlight is shining just on that. You're not giving much attention, you're not paying attention to what's in your peripheral vision, and you've just got your eyes on the prize. Now, what we found, and then we compared that against just like, yeah, you live in a rich world. There are people on the left and the right, there's stop signs up ahead. Take it all in as you naturally would. And that's what we normally do. And in fact, sometimes teach ourselves or make ourselves do through distraction when we think distraction might help. Now, what we found was that when we taught these people this, like, keep your eyes on the prize, this metaphorical spotlight idea, and use that language, what we found was that that exact same distance, the distance is the same for everybody. This physical space is the same for everybody, but that finish line for them looked closer. It looked 20 to 30% closer to them
That's
than
huge.
yes, than people who are using this distraction or take it all in approach. 20 to 30% is huge. You're exactly right. And then think about all of the motivational and psychological consequences. When something looks a third easier, it had that impact on their psychology. Now they were saying, I think I can do this. I'm excited to take this on. This is a challenge rather than a threat to who I am as an exerciser. I'm ready to do this. And that change in self talk translated into, we have studied this in so many ways, but in one study, 23% faster walking times. We put ankle weights on that added substantial weight. We told them to lift their knees up high. So like, if you're ever doing those exercises where it's like high knees, come on, like slap your knees. It was the equivalent of that, but we just said like, do this high knees weighted walking task to the best of your ability. So that was challenging and it raised their heart rate substantially. And it was pretty far that they had to go. But again, they saw it 20 to 30% closer and they moved 23% faster. They were able to do that exercise at a higher rate of efficiency, if that's something that we care about. So I think that's pretty amazing because it was about 1 minute of listening to, like, here's another way that you might look at the world around you. And it had noticeable differences in how they saw the world, the self talk they engaged in, and then how they performed that exercise.
That's so important. Twofold. The idea that it's easier to get started because the task doesn't seem so impossible. And then that you're going to actually do it better once you start, just simply by changing the focal point of your eyes is just, it gets blowing my mind right now. I
Yeah,
can't
thanks.
even.
I think it's great because it provides hope when people might
Yeah.
feel hopeless, right? Or when it seems too hard to get started or it seems too hard to keep going on. Now, a few more things that I want to add to this. One is that, again, it's easy to remember that spotlight of attention metaphor, which is why I think that it sticks. And because it can be instantly impactful, it's something that people can carry with them. So we've done longitudinal studies where people have given us access to their fitness tracker app so we can see what do they do after they leave our lab and they've learned this different way of looking. We see that people go for more walks more often because I think they had a success experience at the beginning with a new tactic that was easy to implement, and so they were able to keep doing it. They walked farther, they took more steps. For the week that followed, when we were looking at what were they actually doing in the real world when we weren't there with a stopwatch and our lab coats looking over their shoulder. When I've dug deeper to see, like, well, who else uses this and when do they use it? When is it most impactful? I was really interested in Joan Benoit Samuelson. She's the first woman who ever won the Olympic marathon when women were eventually allowed to compete in the marathon, like in the 80s, I believe. She uses that tactic also, especially towards the end of a long distance race, right? When she needs an extra push, when the physiological resources are most depleted, when people experience hitting the wall, though I'm not sure she ever did, but when we might need a little extra help, that's when this attentional spotlight way of looking is most useful. She'd say like, I would look at the woman up ahead of me. I would focus on her shorts until I passed her. Then I would set the next target. I would focus on that until I passed that. So it was like actively setting micro goals to focus this attentional spotlight on, particularly towards the end. And she's not unique in that either, because in the last year or two, we actually had a paper come out last month and then again just yesterday that was looking at, well, besides being a gold medal winner in the Olympics for men and women, do successful runners use this? And that is what we found, is that as races go on, 5Ks, 10-mile races, that as the race goes on, runners use this attentional spotlight more and more and more frequently, and that people who run at a faster pace do that focusing of the attentional spotlight at a higher rate. So they are more intentional about engaging that attentional spotlight over time. If you use it too early, it can be tiring. So that's like usually people's first reactions, like, that sounds like a lot of work. And if I'm going to do that for 10 miles, I think I'm going to exhaust myself. And that is true. So it is a strategy that faster runners are using it just more often, especially at the beginning than the end, but especially as time goes on. So that idea of like, well, let's just try to distract ourselves, well, that is hard too. That actually takes a lot of work too. So we might think that that is effective, but it might be because we're not really aware of the impact that it's having on our cognitive resources. Constantly trying to pull ourselves away from, our knees hurting or our breath feeling constricted, that takes work too. So yeah, if we just look at what are faster runners doing, they are narrowing more frequently than they are using this distraction technique, and they ramp that up at a higher rate as they progress further and further through their run.
Anecdotally, having done this yourself, does it get easier to use these strategies the more that you use, like, at first, does it take, like, a lot of effort, and then all of a sudden, do you find yourself sort of doing it without even trying?
Yes, and that's just the power of habits, right? The more
Yeah.
that we practice anything, the easier it can become. Especially when we're talking about using this strategically, not at the beginning, more so at the end, ramping it up to a higher degree at the end. That's not really that hard, but it might be unnatural. And anything that's unnatural takes a little bit of work. So the more that we practice that, the more habitualized it gets, and the easier it can become. Again, when I first was starting this investigation 10 or 12 years ago with the male Olympic runners, I was brought into their circle because one of their trainers had heard one of my TED Talks on exercise that you had recognized or that you mentioned earlier. And he said, like, you should come talk to these guys and I'll introduce you, and let's just see what they have to say. And I was like, great, cool. This is what I was thinking about doing. And he said, oh, I'm not sure that they're going to be able to tell you. They have so like automatized and habitualized
Yeah.
what they do. They may not even have introspective access. Those are my words. They might not be able like to be aware of what's happening. So I don't know. Let's just see. And it was a bit of a struggle for them. They were like, oh, let's see, what do I do? So they were able to articulate it, but it wasn't like, here are my 3 steps to hacking winning a gold medal, right? So they had practiced it so much that they did have to take a beat to figure out, like, what is it that I do? But they do
That's
it. That is what they are doing.
um, I was thinking of this in the way of comparing it to public speaking, like you said, like, when people get anxious, because I was thinking about first experiences maybe at the gym or first experiences back, and how an anxious mind for me means like a lot of darting eyes. Like, I don't know if that is for everybody, but I find my eyes darting everywhere when I'm feeling anxious and I'm trying to take in all of the information.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about what you said on the public speaking and zeroing in on that one person who might have an upset stomach or might not like what you say or might be thinking about something totally, completely different. And I was thinking about talking to people and them saying, like, well, when I go to the gym, like everybody's looking at me, or they're judging me, or they're laughing. I've heard people say these things, and I've offered the idea that, like, maybe it didn't have anything to do with you. But is that our natural response to anxiety, and are we really hurting our chances of, like,
Mhm.
getting back to the gym if we think, everybody's staring when they're not.
Right. You have touched on so many important points here, and all those experiences are real and true. That is our lived reality. That it feels like everybody is looking at us, and that can be really hard to overcome that experience. Um, so what can I say? I have so many things to say about it. One, a new tool to offer is just thinking about curating our visual environment. This applies to the gym anecdote that you've mentioned, but so many facets of our life too. Is how do we curate our visual environment? I'll come back to the to the gym example in a minute, but just think about, how do you stock your fridge and how do you stock your pantry? Curating that visual environment really matters. My husband, lucky man, he burns calories in his sleep. Honestly, he's just super hot when he sleeps, and so his like understanding of how health and fitness doesn't really work. How does he manage the fridge? He only eats anything that's on the like the closest plane. If there's something that's tucked in the back, he never sees it, so he only eats from the front. Right? And so, like, well, think about what's in the front. When I need to get rid of leftovers, I put them at his eye level and the front plate, like closest to when he opens the door, right? All right, we got to get rid of that leftover. I'll put it right there and it'll be gone by tomorrow. And that doing that is something that we might not be that thoughtful about, of like, are we not continuously but maybe weekly taking stock of like, well, where is everything in that fridge? And if we put fruit at a drawer that's easier to pull out, or that it's at our kids eye level, or the candy bars are somewhere that's highly accessible and visible to us, that's where habit comes in. We act on what we see. And so Google, the company, did a great internal audit of what is happening in their snack areas, in their snack rooms. And what they found is that people eat what they see. And that was actually contributing to poor health among employees and weight gain among their employees. So they changed up how the snack shop is laid out. They put the sugary sodas behind opaque glass fridge doors. They put the water higher up at eye level, and they made the chocolate treats harder to see and put dried fruits in clearer jars at hand level. They didn't change access to what the snack shops entailed, but they just changed what's the easiest to see. Massachusetts General Hospital did the same thing in their cafeteria. And in both cases, they found that people chose healthier options more and unhealthier options less, even when the same products were available to them. And that
No
can,
willpower needed.
right, exactly, right? Because willpower, it's not that we don't have enough of it, it's that it's constantly being taxed. And so it's not like it's not a failure of willpower, it's just trying to set ourselves up for success. And so curating the fridge, curating our visual environment can be a way to easily automate or nudge us into the choices that we do want to make for ourselves when we're not thinking effortfully and intentionally every time we need a snack, or our kids are going to grab their own snack without our looking over their shoulders. And so if we think about that, we can be intentional curators of our own visual environment. Coming back to the gym example, how can we do that in that experience? How can we overcome that feeling of everybody's looking at me, or that that which is a real thing? I had that experience once when I tried to join twice actually, when I tried to join an aqua fitness class. I thought, oh, that'll be fun and different and like help me get back into the swing of adding more structured exercise to my day. And then also once when I was trying to get in a new HIIT class. As an academic, as a professor, I have a really flexible schedule. As a parent, I don't. So I knew like I can't go to the gym early in the morning or late at night because that's when I'm a parent. But I have flexibility during the day. So when I tried to join the aqua fitness class and the HIIT classes in the middle of the day, it was mostly people who had more flexibility, which meant older and retired people. So when I looked around the room, I felt like I don't belong here. I didn't feel the self-consciousness, but in the sense of like, oh my God, everybody's going to see how overweight I am, or they're going to see how I don't know how to use this equipment. I didn't feel that anxiety, but I felt the lack of belonging, and that's enough to be off-putting. So I realized like the joy of having a flexible schedule also meant I'm going to have to think about how do I get the exercise classes in a different way. Because when I look at the world, at this gym world, I don't feel like I belong and I don't want to keep going back. So, maybe that provides some insight into like, why might I not like going to the gym? Well, when are we going? And what does that world look like? Are there gyms that cater to people who are like you? Are there times of the day that cater to people who look like you, who might also be worried about those same things and aren't going to be the ones staring for whatever reason they're staring?
Yeah, that feeling of belonging is so underrated and so necessary if you want to be consistent with something. That's a really really great point.
Hey, you.
Thanks for getting in touch with the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast.
We love your questions and adore hearing from you.
Leave us a hello,
A burning question,
feedback.
or anything else you want to share with us on the podcast.
We will play your message live on air if we can.
Thanks for being an amazing friend. Stay safe and moving.
In your book, Clearer, Closer, Better, you say that successful people are literally seeing the world different.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean? And how can we do this?
Sure. Well, I think you've given some ideas already when we think about
Mhm.
like physically seeing that space. It's not just like, oh man, that feels farther away. It's that, but it's also that to them, it literally looks farther away.
Right.
That's an important caveat for the reason that we talked about before, the compassion. Where can we get more compassion for ourselves and for others? It's not about just convincing them. It's not that hard. That's not going to work. Saying that to yourself, it's not that hard. Why can't you just do it? No, because to you, your visual world is harder for you. This world that you are seeing is presenting you challenges that other people might not be experiencing, and have compassion for that. In other contexts, I've had the chance to talk with CEOs, high level executives of some pretty big companies, and I've had some chances to like have real conversations about what are you doing and what are your tricks, and like, is there anything about how you're setting yourself up for success that the rest of us might not be aware of or that we could try to implement? One interesting example to me was that somebody had spent a lot of time, a CEO of a company had spent a lot of time thinking, introspecting about what are his goals, what are, the three big things at this stage of his life that he's working towards. So he was able to distill that into three, like vision board kind of goals. He didn't use it that way, but just three guiding principles of something that mattered to him at that moment. And he wanted visual reminders of that, so that he would know, like, this is what I'm working towards. To be reminders of like, this is the way that I'm going to approach my conversations with employees or managers that are coming into my office. This is how I'm going to approach negotiations in these spaces. And those were things that mattered to him and that he was intentionally working on. And he came up with like, little, it's like visual icons to represent each of those three goals, and then smushed them together. He made like a monogram essentially of elements, visual elements that would remind him of these tactics or these goals that he was working on. And then he planted them surreptitiously in his own office space and where he holds meetings and does negotiations. And as I was talking to him, he was like, they're even here now. And I was like, where? And he's like, I'm not going to tell you, because it was a really personal thing. It was a personal visual motif that he created, and as a reminder for himself, and planted them where he knew he could see them and be reminded of them when it mattered most. Another example about curating his visual environment, and a tactic I had never heard of before. There's a lot of work that went into that. What are the goals? How are you going to visually represent them? How can you smush them into something that when your eyes fall on, I don't even know what it was, this little token or this little sculpture or whatever, that you would be reminded of what matters to you, and it wouldn't be weird for other people because they're so hidden and embedded within your world, that it wouldn't be weird to other people. And that to me was amazing. And I think, people can do exactly that, or just use that as food for fodder to think about how they might translate that into an experience for themselves. I think that's pretty fun.
That is so fun. And although unique to him and his situation, really is highly applicable to
Mhm.
anybody. Just the thought of those little visual reminders, and not in the way of putting the bikini on the fridge.
Right.
People, let's build ourselves up and not tear ourselves down. Now, speaking on goals and working towards them, do you think that most people are good judges of when it comes to like um, goals that we're setting, and if we're progressing or if
Mhm.
we're not progressing? And do you think we are do you think we're a good judge?
No, I don't. And me included. So we've talked about attentional spotlight. We've talked about curating your visual environment. Another one of these little catchphrases to help us remember these tactics today is becoming our own accountant. So that's a third one that I'll put on the table. We need to become our own accountant because our brains are set up in a way to have us be poor accountants, to do that job poorly. And that's important for moving through life. If we were accurate record keepers for all facets of our life, we would be pretty disappointed in ourselves. Again, think about those social blunders, the times we felt embarrassed when we put our foot in our mouth, the mistakes that we all experience in the process of learning, the things that we've done raising our kids, things that we've said, choices that we've made. If we actually remembered all those things, we'd be pretty sad. And it's good that experience of regret or humiliation or shame, those big emotions fade over time. And that sometimes even those experiences are forgotten. That helps us keep self-esteem. That helps us keep motivation. The feeling that, like, I can try this, I can move forward through life. And sometimes when that balance of the forgetting, the helpful forgetting gets out of whack, it can contribute to depression. So it's good that our brain isn't an accurate accountant for helping us feel good about who we are and for moving forward in life. But there are times when we do need to be an accurate accountant. If we want to know, are we really making progress? Are we going to meet our goal if there is a hard and fast deadline? I experienced this myself. So when I was writing the book that you mentioned, I also became a mom for the first time in exactly the same month. They were two things I really wanted in my life, and really awfully, they both hit at the same time. And I wasn't going to say no to either of them. In fact, contractually and physically, I wasn't able to, right? Like, these are both happening in the same month. So it was a lot to take on. And my experience was like, I'm really losing myself. Becoming a mom for the first time was overwhelming, as it is. And it's nothing that really any book or friends can prepare you for. I experienced. So I didn't realize like how I would feel like I don't have me anymore. I'm losing myself in this new world. I want something for me. I'm a high experiencer. I say yes to everything. I experience a lot of FOMO. I want to do it all in this world. That's what I gravitate towards. So I decided, despite like learning how to be a mom, still managing my full research lab, being a professor, and writing this book, I wanted to learn how to be a drummer. I wanted to be a rock drummer. Just one song. I knew I had to be reasonable with my goal, but I just felt like that's cool. And so when people come in the back, like, oh, let's meet the new baby. How's it going? What are you doing? What's it like? And it's just like changing diapers and feeding. That's it. That's all I'm doing. It's like, I'm not cool anymore. This isn't fun. So I decided I want to learn how to play one song on drums. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in the middle of Manhattan, and I had a baby, right? It's like learning to play drums. That was so dumb. But it was what I needed to do for myself. And then I was going to write about it in the book. And so the publisher and editor are like, you got to do this. Like, you got to do this. And so there was a hard and fast deadline for it. And so it was definitely stressful to actually hit that goal. I was going to play a show for public accountability to make sure that I really hit that goal. But my ability to assess my own progress was really poor because it was stressful and it was like an anxious goal. I just felt like I'm getting nowhere. I can't play. I have a background in music, but not in drums. So I had high expectations for like what this performance was going to look like and how I needed to sound without embarrassing myself. And I just felt like I'm not going to get there. I'm not going to get there. I'm not going to get there. But then I wondered how my brain is set up and how anxiety works and how it shapes how we see the world and what we remember. Am I really not going to get there? So for a month, I kept track of how am I doing? I would have my phone like ping me 3 to 4 times a day and say, did you practice? Did you practice? Did you practice? And mostly the answer was no, because we don't practice 4 times a day, 7 days a week. But occasionally I'd say yes. And then if I said yes, it would say like, how did you feel? And then after a month, I downloaded all that data so that I could become an accountant and not let just my memory be the thing that guides my assessment of what did this month look like. And what I actually found was that I practiced far more often than I thought. And though it was shallow, there was an increase in my self-assessments of how was I doing over that month. Thank you. I did learn to play one song on drums, good enough that I played a couple different shows publicly without friends and family there even. And it was fine. And I'm proud of myself for being able to do that. But it did take getting out of my own head, because my own self-assessments of my progress and how that related to the bigger timeline of what I was working towards were totally flawed. So that's just something to keep in mind. I don't think it just applies to me and this idiosyncratic weird goal that maybe nobody else would take on. But that ability to be a good accountant, fundamentally, it's rooted in basic neuroscience principles of how our brain is set up and why it would be set up that way that I think we can all resonate with.
That's beautifully said. I want to end with a question that I'm sure there is no answer to, but I feel that it needs to be asked when we talk about the fact that we're all viewing something that is seemingly the same, totally differently. Is there such thing as the truth?
That's a big philosophical question. And as a behavioral scientist, I really struggle with those philosophical questions. I would come down to saying, like, does it matter if there's
Does it matter?
and that is to be answered for the person themselves in that situation. Sometimes it matters. When we're talking about how all this plays out, which we didn't even get to in the legal system, does it matter? Of course it matters. When we're talking about how people's
Right.
lives are affected and retribution and a feeling of justice for all, yes, that matters. That's a whole other conversation. But right now, does it matter if I see it as 20 feet versus 30 feet? And which one of those is right? It doesn't matter then. I know that seeing it as 20 feet, if I'm trying to run farther or push myself to extend my goal a little bit more, I know that 20 feet, even if that's the wrong way to see it, is better for me.
Yeah.
So I don't care whether 20 feet or 30 feet is right. I know that 20 feet in this instance is better to see it that way. So that's my approach is like, it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong in this instance. It's good to ask ourselves that question in all kinds of scenarios. Does it really matter if I'm right or my husband is right in this fight? No, who's right, who's wrong doesn't matter. Moving forward, how do I move forward and make progress is what matters.
Oh, that is it. That is so it. How do we move forward and make progress? Because at the end of the day, what else matters? This has been the most amazing conversation. I cannot thank you enough. I have to let you tell our listeners where they can hear more from you. Of course, we're going to link all of your TED Talks and your book in the show notes, but also like where can they connect with you and hear more of this amazing
Sure, thanks.
research?
Yeah, I try to post everything and connect everything through LinkedIn. So new things that I write or new content that I've created will be shared through there.
Beautifully said. I love this idea and this hope that you have brought to the fact that, the way that we perceive things is not set in stone and that we do have, you know, a little bit of control and we can hack it a little bit and make the finish line seem a little closer. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
What a pleasure.